Zaman. In the ancient Gaze tongue, it means an era, an appointed time, a season that has boundaries. When we think of Eden, we usually think of it as a timeless blur, a brief, golden flash right before a terrible mistake. We assume the fruit was eaten almost immediately. We assume the quiet did not last. But hidden deep within the manuscript rooms of the Ethiopian highlands, a different memory survived, a precise mathematical memory. They were not there for a single weekend. They did not fall on the third day. Tonight, we are going to dwell inside the 7 peaceful years. Adam and Eve lived in Eden before any sorrow touched their life together. We are going to move slowly through the old Ethiopian memory of creation, especially through the Book of Jubilees, and we are going to listen for the hidden details most readers pass too quickly: the 40 days, the 80 days, the holiness of the garden, the work without weariness, and the exact line that says they lived there 7 years exactly. Breathe with me. We are going there together. What if grief was not immediate? What if the first human story did not begin in panic, but in sacred order? What if, before blame, before hiding, before the serpent's voice pressed itself into the world, there were whole years in which Adam and Eve lived inside a peace so steady that evening itself felt harmless? Not one shining moment, not one symbolic afternoon, but 7 full years. Years long enough for paths to become familiar beneath their feet. Years long enough for fruit to be gathered without grasping. Years long enough for companionship to settle into the body like warmth and stone. Years long enough for holiness to feel not distant, but daily. And the strange detail is that an ancient witness preserved in the Ethiopian canon does not leave that peace vague. It measures it. It counts it. It tells us how long Eden remained untouched by sorrow. Tonight, we are not hurrying toward the fall. Tonight, we are honoring what came before it. What stays with me tonight is not only the big story, but the small hidden detail inside it. The one most people move past too quickly. I am Pastor Michael, and I want to tell you this the way I first felt it when I sat with the passage quietly, not as a lecture, and not as a piece of religious information only, but as a lived moment in the old sacred memory of the Ethiopian Bible. Because the more slowly I returned to this chapter, the more human it became. Not less holy, more holy, because it felt more lived in. Our primary text tonight is the Book of Jubilees, especially chapter 3, preserved with great care in the Ethiopic tradition and remembered within the wider Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon. Jubilees says Adam and Eve were in the garden for 7 years exactly before the serpent approached. That line changes everything. It means Eden was not merely a theological backdrop. It was a habitation. It was a rhythm. It was a life. So we will begin where the text begins to slow the heart. Outside the garden, on the ground of waiting, we will walk with Adam through his 40 days. We will stand near Eve's 80th day and feel why Eden is called holier than all the earth besides. We will follow their first footsteps under no sorrow. We will watch work before weariness, harmony before fracture, and that final 7th-year evening before grief ever learned how to speak. And then, when the study has done its work, we will let it grow quiet. We will move from the mind into the body, from explanation into rest, from the counted years into the night that holds you now. So, if the day has been loud, let it remain outside for a while. If your thoughts have been pressing too close, let the garden open some distance between you and them. And if there is any part of you that has forgotten that peace can be more than a passing feeling, let this old text hand it back carefully. Tonight, quiet listener, we are not rushing towards sorrow. We are honoring the peace that came before it. Adam and Eve are made near holiness, but not yet inside it. Eden is approached as sacred ground, not as ordinary soil. Menucha, rest. Not yet the rest of sleep, quiet listener, but the rest of ordered beginnings. The kind of rest that belongs to a world not yet split open by grief. Before Adam and Eve are ever spoken of as exiles, before the serpent is ever mentioned, before the fields learn thorns and the body learns dread, the Book of Jubilees slows the story down in a way many listeners have never been invited to notice. It does not hurry the first humans into Eden. It lets them remain, for a while, on the ground outside the garden. And that small delay changes the feeling of everything. In Genesis, many readers move quickly from creation to placement, as if Adam opened his eyes and found himself at once beneath every holy branch. But Jubilees, preserved with special honor in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo tradition, handles the moment more carefully. It watches the distance between being made and being brought near. It tells us Adam was created in the first week. It tells us the woman was shown to him in the second. And then it tells us something even quieter, something almost easy to miss if the lines are read too quickly. Adam completed 40 days in the land where he had been created before he was brought into Eden. Eve waited longer. Still, that means the first human story in this ancient telling does not begin with immediate possession. It begins with nearness, waiting, and holy approach. I want you to feel that with me tonight. Adam and Eve are not thrown into paradise as if paradise were common property. They are formed by God, known by God, spoken to by God. And yet the garden still stands before them as a place with its own order, its own gravity, its own sanctity. Eden, in Jubilees, is not merely beautiful space, it is set-apart space. What might those first outside days have felt like? Adam waking beneath a sky still young with its first silences. Eve coming into sight in a world that had not yet learned tension. The animals passing in their ordered kinds. Water moving where God had appointed it. The ground underfoot unstained by fear. And still not yet the garden, not yet the innermost place. There is something deeply gentle in that. Holiness is not grabbed, it is approached. That is one of the reasons this title matters so much. We are not only exploring 7 peaceful years inside Eden, we are beginning by honoring the threshold. If we miss the threshold, we will misunderstand the peace. The 7 years only shine with their full tenderness if we remember that Adam and Eve entered Eden through patience, not through hurry. Paradise begins, in this witness, with reverence. The word used here in Ethiopian tradition is Metzhafe Kufale, often rendered in English as the Book of Divisions or the Book of Jubilees. In Ge'ez usage, it carries the sense of ordered portions, measured sacred time. Time divided by God's wisdom rather than by human urgency. The historical significance of that title matters. Jubilee survived in complete gaze manuscripts in Ethiopia when it was lost in full form elsewhere for many centuries, even though fragments of it also turned up among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. And tonight, that matters because this is not a story about speed. It is a story about holy timing. I will tell you honestly, I have sat with that title longer than I expected to, because there is comfort in remembering that God does not treat time as a nuisance. He can make waiting itself part of a blessing. That insight keeps us from flattening Eden into a decorative backdrop. In Jubilees, Eden is already behaving like a sanctuary before Israel ever receives sanctuary language in the wilderness. The pattern is quiet, but it is there. There is ordinary ground, and there is holier ground. There is life given by God everywhere, and yet there is also a place into which one does not simply wander. The garden is received. This matters especially because so many modern people imagine peace as immediacy. We want relief to arrive at once. We want clarity without process, belonging without preparation, nearness without reverence. But the old text will not let us move that quickly. It teaches by pacing. Adam is loved before he enters. Eve is loved before she enters. Their delay is not rejection. Their waiting is not abandonment. It is part of the order of a holy world. And perhaps that is one reason the story still feels alive in the night. There are seasons when God is not keeping a soul far away in cruelty, but near in preparation. Not cast off, not forgotten. Simply not rushed. The text does not let us stay in reflection too long, though, because the story itself is more beautiful than abstraction. So let us return to the scene. Picture the edge of Eden, not as a gate of iron, but as a boundary of holiness. Adam stands in the land of his making. Eve stands in the brightness of her new being. Above them, the breath of God has not grown distant. Around them, creation has not yet learned suspicion. Nothing in the world is hostile. And yet the garden remains more than pleasant. It is consecrated. Jubilees does not say this with philosophical language first. It says it with timing. 40 days for Adam, 80 for Eve. The calendar itself becomes theology, and once you notice that, other details begin to glow. The text later says, Eden is holier than all the earth besides. That means the world outside Eden is not evil ground. It is still God's earth, still newly made, still good. But the garden holds a concentrated holiness, a kind of first sanctuary where human beings learn what it means to live near divine order without shame. Adam will till and keep there. Eve will walk there. Together they will inhabit it, but not yet. First comes the waiting. I think this is one of the most human parts of the story. Not because the first pair are anxious, the text gives us no such note yet, but because the shape is familiar. We often live just outside what we long to enter, just outside rest, just outside understanding, just outside some better country of the heart. And sometimes the soul assumes delay means distance. Jubilees suggests something gentler. Delay may be part of consecration. Between the first breath and the first peaceful year, there is a threshold. Between formation and habitation, there is a holy pause. Between being made by God and living in the place most saturated with His nearness, there is order, there is sequence, there is meaning, even in the days that look uneventful. So, do not think of the days outside Eden as empty days. Think of them as days already filled with God, but not yet brought to their deepest chamber. The story is still moving. It is moving very softly, and the next step is one of the strangest and most revealing in all this tradition. For Adam's waiting is not Eve's waiting. The text gives her a longer threshold, and it does so for a reason tied to holiness, sanctuary, and the mystery of entry itself. In the next section, we come to her 80th day, and to the line that says, "The garden was holier than all the earth besides." Next, whispering listener, we will walk with Eve to the moment of her entering not merely into beauty, but into a holiness the text treats almost like a sanctuary. Eve enters Eden after 80 days, revealing that the garden is treated as a holy place with sanctuary-like seriousness. There is a line in Jubilees that changes Eden from scenery into sacred space. It is brief, it is easy to glide past, but once you hear it slowly, you cannot quite hear the garden the same way again. After Adam had completed 40 days in the land where he had been created, the text says, he was brought into Eden to till and keep it. But his wife was brought in on the 80th day. And then comes the reason. She entered after those days were completed. For Eden is holier than all the earth besides. That sentence deserves to be handled with care tonight. Not because it is loud, but because it is weighty. The story is still tender. We are still before sorrow. And yet the tenderness is not casual. Eve's entrance is measured. Her approach is governed by holiness. Jubilees places her movement into Eden alongside a pattern that later echoes the laws of purification connected to childbirth and sanctuary boundaries. In other words, the writer is not only telling a story, he is teaching his hearers how to understand sacred space. Now, I do not want to force the text into cold mechanics. This is not a bureaucratic Eden. This is still the first garden, still God's planted delight, still the bright place where Adam and Eve will know one another without shame. But precisely because it is that, the text refuses to cheapen it. Eve does not enter by accident, and she does not enter by haste. Her entrance is liturgical in its quiet way, timed, ordered, honored. The phrase that matters here is not a place name first, but a holiness claim, holier than all the earth besides. The older conceptual world behind such language is the world of Kodesh holiness, that which is set apart unto God. In the gaze Christian memory that preserved Jubilees so faithfully, sacred books and sacred spaces were copied, guarded, kissed, carried, and heard with that same seriousness. Historically, this matters because Jubilees links Eden to sanctuary logic long before later biblical institutions are fully in view, and scholars have long noted how Chapter 3 connects Adam and Eve's entry to patterns later reflected in purification law. Tonight, that matters, because peace in Eden is not thin comfort, it is consecrated peace. And I will tell you truthfully, what moves me here is how the text honors Eve by slowing her moment down instead of reducing her to a shadow in Adam's story. Let us stay with her a little longer, not with vague sentiment, but with the scene itself. 80 days, a full, deliberate span. She has already been made from Adam's side. She has already been brought to him. She already belongs within the human pair. And yet her entrance into Eden is still narrated as something awaited. I hear no contempt in that waiting. I hear gravity. The text is saying, in its own old way, that some places must be entered with awareness of what they are. Perhaps that is why this section of the title feels so peaceful. Not peaceful in the modern sense of emptiness, but peaceful in the ancient sense of right order. Eve is not shoved across a threshold by panic. She is brought. The verb matters. Adam was brought in. Eve was brought in. The first paradise is entered as gift. And what might her entering have felt like? Not the entrance of someone stepping into a foreign court where she fears displeasure. Not the entrance of someone trying to prove herself, but the entrance of one who comes at the appointed time into a place already prepared, warm ground, living green, trees that are not ornamental only, but holy in their setting, light gathering on leaves. Adam already there, not as master of the place, but as one entrusted with its keeping, and Eve, on the 80th day, crossing from the common earth into the innermost garden of the early world. The Ethiopian script tradition preserves this moment with a kind of gentle firmness. It does not blur the distinction between all the earth and the garden within it. That distinction is part of the theology of the passage. If Eden is holier than all the earth besides, then entry matters. Time matters, purity matters, and the first life of humanity inside the garden must be understood not merely as innocent life, but as life in a holy precinct. That insight also helps the title remain faithful. We are telling the story of 7 peaceful years before sorrow. But those years are not peaceful because nothing happens. They are peaceful because Adam and Eve live in right relation to the holiness around them. Peace here is not emptiness, it is harmony with sacred order. There is another tenderness here as well. The world outside Eden is still good, but the text teaches degrees of nearness. That is a subtle thought, and a needed one. There are places in life where we are under God's care, and there are moments, rare and unforgettable, when we know ourselves to be brought unusually near. Eden, in this telling, is that nearness intensified. Eve's 80th day is the crossing into it. I sometimes think modern readers underestimate how much beauty there is in being brought rather than in taking. So much of human exhaustion comes from forcing doors, naming ourselves ready, pushing our way into rooms our hearts have not yet learned how to inhabit. But Eve's entrance is given, not seized. Her first step in Eden belongs to divine order, and once she has crossed that threshold, the title begins to open fully. Because now, at last, the two are together inside the garden. The waiting has ended. The approach has become habitation. The holiness that stood before them now surrounds them. From this point onward, the next question is no longer when will they enter, but how did they live? That is the question I want to protect. We are still before sorrow. We are still before blame, before hiding, before the changed sound of speech. What did peace feel like when it still had no rival? What was work like before toil? What was companionship like before injury? What was evening like before dread could attach itself to the dark? Those are not abstract questions. They belong to the title itself. And the old text does not leave us empty-handed. It gives us rhythm, purpose, labor, fruit, and time. In other words, it begins to show us that paradise was lived, not merely admired. So now that Eve has entered on her 80th day, we can step with Adam and Eve into the first ordinary day that was never ordinary at all. The next section turns from threshold to habitation, from entering holiness to walking inside it. As we step ahead, keep your heart open and quiet. We will follow their first footsteps under no sorrow and see why peace in Eden was not idleness, but life rightly ordered. Before we continue, watchful listener, let me ask you something softly. When did you last feel truly still? And if this kind of ancient rest belongs in your nights, a quiet subscribe keeps it close. Not as pressure, not as noise, only as a small way of returning to these old paths again when you need them. No, come back with me, because the next part matters. We are about to step into the first ordinary day in Eden that was never ordinary at all. Adam and Eve begin their shared life inside Eden, discovering work, companionship, and delight before grief, shame, or fear have entered the human world. Now, at last, we may enter the title as a lived world. Adam is inside, Eve is inside. The waiting days have completed their quiet work. The threshold is behind them. And before them stretches not a dream blurred by distance, but a garden in which they actually live. This is important. Eden, as Jubilees tells it, is not a painted icon hanging far away from touch. It is a place of movement, tending, eating, gathering, protecting, speaking, and resting. Paradise has footsteps in it. The text says Adam and his wife were in the garden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it. That means the first peaceful years were not stillness in the sense of inactivity. They were stillness in the sense of unbrokenness. Their days had shape. Their work had purpose. Their bodies knew exertion without strain. Their seeing was clear. Their companionship had no bruise in it. Nothing in them had yet begun to turn away. This is one of the most beautiful corrections these old lines offer to tired imaginations. Many people picture paradise as passivity, as if peace must mean floating through brightness without task or texture. But Jubilees gives Adam work and calls that peace. He tills, he keeps, he gathers fruit, he sets some aside. He protects the garden from birds and beasts and cattle. That is not drudgery. It is stewardship before anxiety, purpose before sweat, responsibility without dread. And Eve is there beside him, not as an afterthought, but as his companion. inside, the holy place. The text is sparing, but its spareness lets the scene breathe. We are not assaulted by many details. We are given enough to imagine the texture faithfully. Morning light in branches untroubled by violence. Fruit received, not grasped. Paths worn softly by repeated peace. The two of them learning the sound of each other's voices in a world where neither voice has yet learned sharpness. The name Eden itself is often connected with delight, pleasure, or pleasantness. In the biblical imagination, Eden is not merely a coordinate on a map. It is a place name carrying the feel of abundance and living sweetness. Through Hebrew memory, and later through translations and interpretations preserved in Christian traditions including Gehazi manuscript culture, the garden remains not just somewhere humanity, but somewhere humanity was at ease with God. Historically, the preservation of such traditions matters because texts like Jubilees do more than repeat Genesis. They stretch the emotional texture of Eden by telling us how long Adam and Eve remained there in unbroken peace. And tonight, that matters because many people have forgotten that holiness and delight once belonged together. I have wondered more than once whether that is why this part of the story feels so healing without needing to become vague. It remembers that nearness to God was once also ease. The days themselves begin to gather shape if we listen carefully. Adam rises, not into alarm, but into entrusted work. Eve moves with him through a world not yet defensive. They gather what is given. They keep what is entrusted. They are naked and know it not, the text says, and are not ashamed. That line must be heard gently. It is not childishness. It is transparency. Nothing in them is split between inner and outer life. Nothing needs cover, because nothing has yet curdled into self-protection. And the garden answers them with its own kind of peace. Trees do not threaten. Fruit does not accuse. The ground does not resist. Even the living creatures belong to an order still unfractured. Later in the chapter, Jubilees will say that the mouths of beasts and birds were closed only after Adam went forth from Eden, because before that they had spoken with one another with one lip and one tongue. We do not need to over-explain the mystery tonight. It is enough to let it widen the atmosphere. Eden is not merely a pretty orchard. It is a cosmos in harmony. So imagine, quiet observer, the first footsteps of Adam and Eve beneath trees that have never witnessed fear. Not hurried steps, not suspicious steps, not steps taken while scanning for danger. Just the soft rhythm of creatures entirely at home in the world God has given. The air is not heavy with unfinished sorrow. The ground does not carry memory of graves. Evening does not come as a warning. Night does not gather around hidden shame. Their life is not empty of depth. It is full of unbroken relation. And if we ask what those early years were like, the answer must remain tied to the text. They tilled, they kept, they ate, they set aside fruit. They moved among trees that were holy in a garden, holier than all the earth besides. That is already enough to sustain wonder. We do not need to force 1,000 embellishments into the passage. The strength is in the restraint. A few details, faithfully heard, become luminous. There is one more thing I want to notice here. Peace before sorrow is not the absence of embodiment. Adam and Eve are bodily in Eden. They walk, gather, work, receive, and rest. The goodness of the garden is not detached from the goodness of being creatures. That matters deeply in the night, because so much human fatigue comes from feeling split from one's own createdness. But in Eden, the body is not yet enemy, burden, project, or warning. It is simply the dwelling place of life. As a pastor, I cannot hear this part without thinking of how many people no longer know what it feels like to do one small necessary task without inward noise attached to it, to prepare a meal without dread, to enter an evening without replay, to walk beside another person without measuring how they see you. What moves me here is not that Eden was spectacular, though surely it was. What moves me is that it was ordinary in a holy way. Peace had daily form. That is why the title must be guarded carefully. The 7 peaceful years are not 7 blank years. They are 7 years filled with right labor, right companionship, right relation to place, right relation to God. Sorrow has not yet entered the bloodstream of creation. Shame has not yet taught the hands to hide. Fear has not yet bent the spine inward. Life is still straight, and in some way that is the real tenderness of this scene. Not that Adam and Eve had no life to live, but that the life they lived had not yet been broken against itself. Slower. The peace is concrete. It has fruit on it, dust on it, light on it, shared footsteps on it. We have now reached the doorway to the deepest line in tonight's story. Because the text does not merely tell us that they lived in Eden, it measures the span. It tells us how long the peace lasted before the serpent approached. In the next section, we will dwell in that astonishing phrase, 7 years exactly. We come to the line, most people pass too quickly. The measured length of paradise itself, 7 years exactly, before sorrow found its voice. Adam and Eve live inside Eden, with labor that is purposeful but not painful, ordered but not anxious, bodily but not burdened. It is one thing to say that Adam and Eve were at peace in Eden. It is another thing to ask what that peace actually looked like from morning to evening. The Book of Jubilees does not leave us with a soft blur. It says Adam and his wife were in the garden, tilling and keeping it. That is not ornamental language. It means the first human years inside holiness had shape, purpose, and movement. Peace was not emptiness. Peace was work before weariness. That is important because many listeners have been taught, without realizing it, to imagine paradise as a suspension of ordinary life, as though blessedness could only mean the absence of task. But the text tells another story. Adam is given work, and that work is not punishment. Eve shares the life of that place, and her presence in the garden is not decorative. Together, they inhabit a holy world where labor has not yet been bent into strain. Their hands can move without resentment. Their bodies can bend without dread. Their attention can rest on what is in front of them without being divided by worry. Let us stay close to the details. Jubilees says Adam tilled the garden. It says he was instructed to do everything suitable for tillage. It says he gathered fruit and ate, and set some aside for himself and for his wife. It says he protected the garden from birds and beasts and cattle. Every one of those verbs matters. Tilled, instructed, gathered, ate, set aside, protected. This is not a static paradise. It is an entrusted one. And that word entrusted may be the gentlest way to understand the section. Adam is not scrambling for survival. He is not trying to wrest blessing from an unwilling ground. He is receiving a charge within a living abundance. The garden is holy. The trees are holy in their setting. The fruit is given, but the giving does not erase stewardship. Eden is generous, but it is not careless. Peace includes responsibility. One of the key verbal pairs behind this scene is the ancient expression often translated as to till and to keep. In biblical language, these verbs are associated not only with agriculture, but with service and watchfulness, labor offered, and trust maintained. Historically, that matters because readers across Jewish and Christian traditions have noticed that the language of Eden often leans towards sanctuary patterns, where tending and guarding belong to sacred duty, not mere farm routine. In the wider manuscript, memory preserved through Hebrew tradition, echoed in texts like Genesis and deepened in Jubilees, Adam is not simply busy. He is serving within a holy space. And tonight, that matters, because many tired people have only known labor as depletion. I will tell you honestly, this part always makes me slow down, because it reminds me that work itself was not the wound. The wound came later. The first work was clean. If we listen closely enough, a whole texture begins to emerge. Adam rises in a garden that has never resisted him. The ground does not hide harvest from him. Trees do not stand as symbols of frustration. Eve moves beside him where nothing yet twists her presence into rivalry or suspicion. They gather fruit without hoarding. They keep the place without fear that it will fail them. They inhabit the same tasks, not as competitors, not as strangers, but as companions inside one entrusted world. This is why the title remains so rich. The 7 peaceful years before sorrow were not 7 years of drift. They were 7 years of right relation between body, place, purpose, and God. The hands could work because the heart was unfractured. The body could grow tired at evening without being spiritually crushed by the day. The ground could receive footsteps without becoming a battlefield. And notice what is absent. No sweat of the brow under curse. No thorns in the field. No bread earned under dread. No blaming voice. No inward recoil from one another. Jubilees knows the darker lines are coming later, but here it lingers before them. It lets us witness labor before labor is wounded. There is something profoundly human in that. Many people do not fear work itself as much as they fear what work has become. Work attached to proving. Work attached to scarcity. Work attached to not being enough. Work attached to comparison. But Adam's tending in Eden is not tied to any of those shadows. It is simply the form love takes in a garden that has been given to him. He keeps because he belongs. He labors because he has been entrusted. He gathers because abundance is meant to be received with attention. I want to keep this scene very specific because the title deserves it. Imagine Adam reaching for fruit that does not accuse him. Imagine Eve bending beside living growth that offers itself without resistance. Imagine the sound of leaves not yet associated with hiding. Imagine paths repeated gently over days and months until the life of the garden becomes familiar in the best way. Not dull, familiar. Holy familiarity, the kind that steadies rather than numbs. There is another subtle beauty here. Jubilees, says Adam, set aside what remained for himself and for his wife. That line sounds small, but it carries an entire domestic tenderness inside it. Even in paradise, there is shared provision. There is thoughtfulness. There is the simple act of preparing for another person, not out of fear of lack, but out of the quiet goodness of mutual life. Eden is not merely dazzling theology, it is daily care. This also protects the script from becoming too abstract. The peace of Eden is not an idea floating above human life. It is a life with fruit in the hands, soil underfoot, and another person nearby. It is ordered time in a holy place. Adam and Eve are not spectators in the garden. They are dwellers, and in this dwelling, their bodies are not enemies. The body reaches, lifts, turns, walks, receives. The body participates in peace before sorrow. The human form is not yet a place of shame or ache or defense. It is simply creaturely goodness moving through creaturely goodness under the gaze of God. That is one reason these ancient lines calm the heart without having to abandon the story. The comfort arises from the scene itself. As a pastor, I cannot hear Adam's work in Eden, without thinking of how many people long not for a life without tasks, but for a life in which tasks are no longer fused to inner turmoil, not to escape embodiment, but to be restored within it, not to stop carrying responsibility, but to carry it without inward fracture. Jubilees gives us that memory in seed form. The work is there, the wound is not. So, when we say these were peaceful years, we do not mean they were vacant years. We mean they were years before peace and purpose had been torn apart from one another. Adam and Eve lived with a kind of integrity that later generations would ache to recover. Their labor belonged to delight. Their keeping belonged to trust. Their evenings belonged to completion, not exhaustion. And perhaps that is why the old Ethiopian canonical witness feels so important here. It does not merely say Adam and Eve were in Eden. It describes a mode of life, a human life unbroken against itself, a human life still capable of receiving instruction without resistance, work without dread, fruit without grasping, companionship without self-protection. The title's promise is growing clearer now. The peaceful years were real years. They had mornings, they had tasks, they had repeated gestures, they had rhythms. That matters, quiet listener, because peace becomes believable when it is given texture. A peace with no tasks in it can feel unreal. But a peace with fruit, soil, watchfulness, and shared provision begins to feel inhabitable. The story is not drifting away from us. It is becoming more concrete. We are ready for the line at the center of tonight's entire journey. The line that does not merely describe Eden, but measures it. In the next section, we come to the phrase that makes these years unforgettable. 7 years exactly. Now, peaceful listener, we will rest inside the most precise line in the chapter, the measured span of paradise itself. 7 years exactly. Some nights, peaceful listener, what hurts most is not the size of what you carried, but the feeling that no one really saw how long you carried it. That is one reason this line about 7 years touches me. God notices time. He notices seasons. He notices the length of peace and the length of pain. Nothing in your life has been lived in a blur to him. And now, gently, we return to the garden, to the number the text refused to leave uncounted. Jubilees gives a measured duration to paradise, revealing that the peace of Eden was not momentary, but sustained across 7 full years. There are phrases in ancient texts that feel like doors, small doors, almost hidden, easy to pass by if you are reading quickly. But once you stop and touch the handle, an entire room opens. Tonight, the phrase is this one: 7 years exactly. The Book of Jubilees does not say Adam and Eve were in Eden for a little while. It does not leave the span vague. It marks it. It numbers it. It preserves it with a kind of sacred precision. In the first week of the first Jubilee, Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it. And after the completion of the 7 years, which he had completed there, 7 years exactly, then the serpent came. That is the center of this whole title. Not simply Eden, not simply Adam and Eve, not simply peace before sorrow, but 7 full years of life before the world was broken by that voice. 7 years before fear entered speech. 7 years before the first blame. 7 years before the first hiding. 7 years before the first grave was even imaginable. I want to let that number breathe tonight. 7 years is long enough to learn the paths of a place, long enough for trees to become familiar companions, long enough for recurring mornings to shape the body into belonging, long enough to know the seasons of light in the garden, the sound of water under different skies, the ripening rhythm of fruit, the cadence of another person's steps beside your own. In other words, this was not a fragile peace that barely began before it was shattered. It was an inhabited peace, The specific proper section is Jubilees itself, a text built around sacred measures of time, weeks, jubilees, appointed sequences, and remembered order. In English, the title Book of Jubilees points to patterns of sacred chronology, but the gaze title Metzhafe Kufale also preserves the sense of divisions or ordered portions. Historically, this matters because the author does not treat time as incidental decoration. He theologizes through chronology. He counts because counting reveals meaning. The 7-year span in Eden is part of that design, and it survived in the Ethiopic manuscript tradition, even when the full book disappeared from most Christian canons outside Ethiopia for many centuries. Tonight, that matters, because many people remember Eden only as a symbol, while Jubilees asks us to remember it as lived time. And I will tell you plainly, there is something in that phrase, 7 years exactly, that stays with me after the page is closed. It makes paradise feel heartbreakingly real. Real, because counted things are lived things. A numbered span suggests recurrence. Repeated meals, repeated conversations, repeated evenings, repeated work, repeated rest. When the text says 7 years exactly, it quietly insists that what was lost was not a single shining moment, but a whole way of being human sustained across time. And that changes the emotional weight of the title. If sorrow had entered immediately, then Eden might feel like a symbol only, a theological spark struck and gone. But 7 years gives it depth. 7 years gives it memory. 7 years allows the first pair to know peace long enough that its later absence will mean something terrible. The tragedy of exile becomes sharper because the goodness was not imaginary. 7 is also a number, already glowing in biblical imagination. The number of completion, fullness, sacred order. The week of creation itself carried into patterned time. I do not want to overstate beyond what the text says, but I do want to note that the number 7 here does not feel random. It feels fitting. The world that began in ordered days now grants the first human pair an ordered span of peace before rupture enters. The symmetry is quiet, but it is there. Think of what 7 years means in a human life. A child can grow from helplessness into speaking memory. A marriage can gather its first deep habits. A place can move from unfamiliarity into home. A grief can sometimes become the calendar by which everything else is remembered. 7 years is not a passing instant. It is substantial. And Jubilees says that is how long the first human peace lasted. I have often wondered whether modern readers avoid this line because it is almost too tender to hold. It suggests there was once enough peace for repetition, enough safety for ordinary days, enough unbroken time for delight to become familiar instead of rare. Many people can imagine a beautiful moment. Fewer know what to do with the idea of 7 years exactly, and yet the text offers it with plainness. No fireworks, no decorative swelling, just the measured statement. That is part of its power. Scripture and related ancient tradition often move us most deeply when they are exact. The precision itself becomes emotional. 7 years exactly. Not nearly. Not about. Exactly. That word exactly does something to the heart. It tells us the author cared about the boundary line between peace and sorrow. He did not want the listener to think the fall swallowed Eden into vagueness. He wanted the count remembered, perhaps because what is counted is honored. Perhaps because what is measured can be mourned properly. Perhaps because he knew that even later generations, far outside the garden, would need to hear that there once was a real duration of unbroken life. This is also where the title most clearly resists generic drift. We are not simply saying Adam and Eve had a peaceful feeling. We are saying that according to Jubilees, the first human beings lived within a defined span of sacred calm before the serpent approached. The old text gives the piece a length. That keeps the story anchored. It protects wonder from dissolving into mood alone. And if we allow ourselves to imagine the 7 years faithfully without overreaching, then what emerges is not spectacle but continuity. 7 years of Adam rising to tend, 7 years of Eve moving beside him, 7 years of trees, fruit, paths, and shared speech. 7 years in a garden holier than all the earth besides. 7 years before sorrow knew how to name them. As a pastor, I cannot help hearing in that phrase a gentle protest against despair, not because it promises that earthly life now will repeat Eden untouched. It will not, but because it reminds us that peace is not fiction in the biblical imagination. It is not naive. It once existed in history's earliest dawn, and the memory of it was preserved carefully enough to be counted. Let that number settle softly. 7 years exactly, not as a slogan, but as a chamber you can step into for a while tonight. The text is not finished opening though, because the world inside those years was stranger and more alive than many of us have been taught. For Jubilees says that after Adam went out from the garden, the mouths of the creatures were closed, which means that before sorrow, the whole created order carried a harmony we can scarcely imagine. In the next section, we listen to that living world, one lip and one tongue. Next, we come to the sound of Eden itself, a creation still speaking in one shared tongue before the garden fell silent. Jubilee suggests that before exile, the creatures of Eden shared a living harmony, speaking together until that speech was closed when Adam left the garden. One of the strangest lines in Jubilees comes not at the beginning of the Eden story, but near its sorrowful turn. After Adam goes forth from the garden, the text says, "The mouth of all beasts and cattle and birds and whatever walks and moves was closed, so that they could no longer speak, for they had all spoken with one another, with one lip and with one tongue." It is a remarkable claim, easy to overlook, easy to flatten into novelty, but tonight it deserves to be heard as part of the atmosphere of those 7 peaceful years. Because if the mouths of creation were closed only after exile, then the world inside Eden was not merely beautiful, it was articulate, ordered, responsive. The harmony of paradise was not confined to Adam and Eve alone. It extended outward through the living fabric of creaturely life. The garden was not a private refuge from the world. It was the world's deepest coherence gathered into one place. Now, I do not want to force this mystery into a rigid system. Ancient texts often preserve wonders in a way that leaves room for reverent listening. The line is not asking us to perform tricks of explanation. It is asking us to feel how complete the harmony once was. One lip, one tongue, a creation not yet fractured against itself. Speech before suspicion, sound before fear, relation before rupture. Notice this carefully. The word Jubilees appears again, but now in conversation with another ancient memory world. The idea of one speech, a unity of utterance before division. The phrase one lip and one tongue echoes the biblical imagination of undivided communication and reminds us that in this text, the fall affects not only morality, but the very music of creation. Historically, this matters because Jubilees was preserved in Ge'ez within Ethiopian Christian tradition, while also being confirmed in part by ancient fragments from Qumran, which shows that these unusual Eden details were not late inventions of modern curiosity. They belong to a much older stream of interpretation. Tonight, That matters, because it enlarges the 7 peaceful years from a private domestic peace into a cosmic peace. And I will tell you honestly, I think many people miss this detail because they hurry. And yet once I noticed it, Eden never sounded silent to me again. So let us imagine carefully, not wildly. Adam moves beneath branches, and the world around him is not mute in the way we now know muteness. Eve gathers fruit in a place where creaturely life is not organized by terror. Birds do not scatter under a law of panic. Beasts are not yet emblems of threat. The whole order of life rests inside a deeper intelligibility. We are not told every contour of that speech, and we do not need to invent them. It is enough to recognize that the chapter presents exile as a closing of voices, and that means the 7 years in Eden included a kind of sound later generations would never know in the same way again. Not noise, harmony, not chatter, a chord. The language of the text is almost liturgical in its sadness. They had spoken with one another and then they could no longer. Paradise is remembered not only by what the eye once saw, but by what the ear once heard. This matters for the title because sorrow is not merely pain entering the human heart. Sorrow is also diminution, reduction, silencing, a shrinking of the world's former fullness. If Adam and Eve lived 7 peaceful years before sorrow, then part of that peace included a creation not yet narrowed into threat, confusion, and estrangement. The old storytellers of faith often understood something we forget. The first wound of sin is not only legal or moral, though it has those dimensions. It is relational in the broadest sense. God and human, human and human, human and self, human and ground, human and creature. After Eden, everything still exists, but not in the same music. Jubilees lets that truth appear in a single unforgettable image, mouths closed. The story is moving closer now to the very edge of sorrow, but it has not crossed it, not yet. We are still inside the measured peace, still inside the 7 years, still close enough to imagine an evening in the garden before any accusing voice had entered it. As we continue, we come to that final peaceful season, the 7th year evening, when everything most fragile and beautiful in the title gathers itself before the coming interruption. Next, we step into the last tender stretch before the serpent arrives the evening atmosphere of Eden at the end of its 7th peaceful year. The final peaceful season of Eden is held in view just before the serpent approaches, allowing the listener to feel the fragile fullness of paradise at the edge of change. We have come very near the edge now, not beyond it, not into the full sorrow itself, but near enough to feel how delicate the peace had become simply because it had lasted long enough to be loved. That is the feeling of this section. The 7th year evening, the closing stretch of paradise before the voice of the serpent enters the quiet. Jubilees tells us that after the completion of the 7 years, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day, the serpent came and approached the woman. Once again, the text counts. Once again, it measures. It gives not only years, but a month and a day. This matters because the old writer wants the boundary remembered. Peace ended somewhere. The sorrow did not ooze in vaguely. It arrived. There was a before, and then there was the beginning of after. But tonight, we remain in the before. We linger in the hush, just ahead of that approach. We let the evening gather in the garden, while Adam and Eve are still themselves, without division. We let the light soften on leaves that have never watched them hide. We let the air move over warm ground not yet marked by exile. We let the creatures remain within their ancient harmony for one more little while. Look closely. I want to place gently. Here is Gihon, one of the rivers named in the Eden tradition of Genesis. later remembered in interpretive streams that sometimes linked Edenic geography with lands known to biblical and African memory, including Kush and, in later Ethiopian imagination, associations with the Blue Nile world. Historically, such identifications were debated, poetic, symbolic, and regionally cherished, rather than settled in one simple way. But they mattered, because believers have long tried to imagine Eden not as fantasy, but as a remembered holy geography, touching real rivers and real earth. Tonight, that matters because the seventh-year piece becomes more tangible when water moves through it, not as an abstract stream in a painting, but as living current beside living creatures in a living garden. And I will tell you honestly, whenever Gihon appears near Eden, I feel the text becoming less like a distant myth and more like a place someone once tried to locate with love. So imagine the seventh-year evening carefully, not with overdrawn spectacle, with tenderness. Adam has known this garden long enough now to move through it as one who belongs. Eve has known it long enough for the paths to hold memory under her steps. The trees are no less holy for being familiar. The fruit is no less beautiful for being regularly received. The work of keeping has not stripped the place of wonder. It has deepened wonder into intimacy. This is the subtle ache of the title. If paradise had lasted only a day, then its loss would be sharp but thin. But after 7 years, every corner of Eden would already carry shared memory. A tree beneath which they once rested, a bend in the path where evening light lingered, fruit gathered in a certain order, water heard from a certain distance. These things are not in the chapter as itemized inventory, and I do not want to add what the text does not give. But the number itself authorizes the feeling of accumulated familiarity. 7 years exactly allows memory to take root, and that is why the approaching serpent feels so grievous even before he speaks. He approaches not a fresh innocence too new to know itself, but a mature peace, a practiced companionship, a lived rhythm. The woman he approaches is not standing in an unentered garden. She is in a home of holiness. The man who will soon hear her voice is not newly formed from dust that morning. He is one who has spent 7 years inside unbroken order. Do you hear how the story is tightening without abandoning gentleness? This is the kind of tension the title needs. Not cinematic thunder, not harsh foreshadowing, just the soft ache of knowing that what has lasted beautifully is now near interruption. That ache belongs to real love. We do not tremble over what meant nothing. We tremble over what became precious. The old text, in its own restrained way, gives us permission to feel that preciousness. It gives dates because dates dignify reality. It tells us exactly when the serpent approached because the author does not want us to think sorrow was always there. No, there was a world before it, a countable one, a livable one, a world of ordered days and faithful evenings. This is also the moment where the whole script must remain deeply title faithful. Before sleep transition, we do not wander into vague consolation. We stay with Adam and Eve. We stay with the seventh year. We stay with the last unbroken evening. We stay with the human nearness of it, the kind of peace that had become ordinary enough to feel permanent. And there is the heartbreak. Ordinary enough to feel permanent. That may be the tenderest and saddest thought in all of this. After 7 years, perhaps the first pair no longer felt they were standing in a brief miracle. Perhaps Eden had simply become life. The paths familiar. The labor familiar. The fruit familiar. The companionship familiar. The holy nearness familiar. Not less wondrous for being familiar, but more deeply rooted. Then the serpent came. I think many listeners know the ache of that structure, even if the setting is far from Eden. Not the fall itself, not in the same way, but the experience of something once gentle becoming vulnerable because it had lasted long enough to be woven into the heart. A season of trust, a season of companionship, a season when evenings did not yet feel dangerous. Jubilees brings us to the edge of that kind of loss by first honoring the fullness of what existed before it. So let us end this section still in the before. The serpent has not yet spoken. The woman has not yet answered. The man has not yet eaten. No fig leaves have yet been sown. No blame has yet bent the air. We are still in the 7th year evening, still within the final chamber of peace. The garden remains holier than all the earth besides. The creatures remain within their old harmony. Adam and Eve remain unashamed beneath the soft descending light. That is where I want to leave the story for now, not because the next part does not matter, but because tonight's promise was the peace before sorrow, and we have now walked long enough within it to feel its reality. In the next movement, the teaching will begin to loosen its hold. The study will give way to rest. The garden will no longer be something we analyze, but something we quietly remain inside. The study will soften into silence, and the garden itself will keep watch while you rest inside the hush before grief. The final line before the fall is held carefully in view, so the listener can feel the exact boundary between 7 years of peace and the first approach of sorrow. There is a tenderness in stopping just before a wound opens, not refusing the truth, not pretending the harder lines do not exist, simply honoring the last unbroken breath before them. That is where we are now, quiet listener. At the edge, not at the exile, not at the fig leaves, not at the blame. We are standing at the final threshold before sorrow learned how to speak into human hearing. The Book of Jubilees gives this threshold with remarkable precision. After the completion of the 7 years, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day, the serpent came and approached the woman. Once again, the text counts. Once again, it refuses to leave the turning vague. That precision matters. It tells us that the peace of Eden did not dissolve into loss like mist. It came to a boundary. It had a measurable end to its untouched season. And because we know that, we can feel the weight of what came before with even greater care. 7 years of unashamed life. 7 years of work without weariness. 7 years in a garden holier than all the earth besides. 7 years in which the soundscape of creation still belonged to concord. 7 years in which evening could descend without dread. When the serpent approaches, he approaches a real peace, not a symbolic one. He approaches a household of holiness already lived in. This is the place where many tellings rush. They hurry to the temptation because they assume the drama begins there. But tonight the drama is already here. In the last stillness, in the pause before the first distortion, in the sacred hush before a created voice is answered by a false one. If we rush past that hush, we lose the whole emotional architecture of the title. The detail to notice is this, that matters in this final pre-transition section, is the heavenly tablets. The phrase Jubilees repeatedly uses for the divine pattern in which sacred order, appointed times, and covenantal realities are written and remembered. In English, heavenly tablets evokes a record above human forgetfulness, a witness to the order God established before human rebellion. Historically, that matters because Jubilees presents many earthly patterns, seasons, purity, calendars, and boundaries as reflections of a higher ordering already inscribed in heaven. The date attached to the serpent's approach belongs to that same habit of sacred precision. And tonight, that matters because it reminds us that even the boundary line between peace and sorrow was not lost in confusion. I will tell you honestly, this detail makes me feel the sadness of Eden more deeply, because it means the world before grief was not dreamlike or blurry. It was clear enough to be recorded. The 2nd month, the 17th day, a specific point in time, not myth as fog, but memory with contour. The old writer is teaching us how to feel the reality of the first piece by showing us exactly where it ended. It is almost as if he knows later readers will need help, believing that there truly was a before accusation, a before shame, a before defensive love, a before human speech learned to twist. And that is what I want to keep before us now, the before, not as denial, but as reverence. Adam and Eve are still in the garden. They are still in the rhythm of holy habitation. The path beneath their feet has not yet become a path away from home. The trees have not yet watched them hide. Their bodies have not yet learned the instinct to cover. The creatures have not yet fallen into the later silence of fracture. The air is still whole. There is something almost unbearably moving about the fact that sorrow in the biblical imagination had to arrive. It was not native to Eden. It was not baked into the world from the first hour. It approached. It entered. It came from outside the harmony it would damage. That alone changes the emotional texture of the script. It means the title promise is not sentimental. There really were years in which sorrow had not yet found a human voice. And perhaps that is why this scene must remain gentle. We do not need to thunder about catastrophe. The text itself does the work. A serpent came and approached the woman. The sentence is quiet, but everything in the chapter bends around it. The approach is enough. The piece has reached its edge. Yet tonight we stay on this side of the speaking. We let the line stop where the title needs it to stop. Before sorrow had a voice, before falsehood entered conversation, before the inward life of Adam and Eve was split into cover and exposure, fear and blame, hunger and shame. This is where the promise of the video finds its fullest completion. We have walked through the years, the labor, the harmony, the familiarity, the evening hush. Now we rest at the exact brink of the change. The old traditions of faith often understand that one way to honor what was lost is not merely to describe the loss, but to dwell properly in what existed before it. That is what we have done tonight. We have not treated Eden as a decorative preface to disaster. We have treated it as a real habitation, a sanctuary of living time, a place where Adam and Eve were not only innocent, but settled, not only blessed, but accustomed to blessing, not only present, but at home. As a servant of God, I think many people ache not only because life is hard, but because they have forgotten it was ever meant to be whole. Not easy in a shallow sense. Whole. The memory of Eden gives language to that ache. The 7 peaceful years give duration to it, and this final line before the fall gives it contour. We are not longing for fantasy. We are longing for a lost coherence that sacred texts still dare to remember. So let the scene remain here for one more moment. Adam nearby, Eve within the garden, the warm light of a late day resting on leaves. Fruit still received as gift, paths still familiar under unashamed feet, water still moving with patient continuity. The whole garden held in a holiness deeper than beauty alone. And beyond the edge of that living peace, an approach that has not yet been answered. That is enough for the mind now. We have followed the story as far as tonight needs to follow it. The text has given us the years, the rhythm, the holiness, the work, the harmony, and the final hush before the first intrusion. Now, the study loosens its hands. Now, we do not press further into explanation. We let the garden remain whole around us. We let the voice become slower. We let the body receive what the story has already given. From this moment, receptive listener, the study is done. We will not analyze the garden anymore. We will simply rest inside it. The study is done now. peaceful listener. And the garden does not need us to explain it anymore. It has already spoken softly enough. Adam and Eve have walked their 7 peaceful years before us. The evening has gathered. The leaves have darkened into gentler colors. The water is still moving. The warm stone still holds the last of the day. From this moment, only the voice, only the quiet. No more questions to solve. No more details to arrange. No more lines to compare. Only the garden. Only the path. Only the hush before grief. Let the teaching settle into your bones now. Let the story stop being something outside you for a while. Let it become a place where you can lie down in the dark without fear. The ancient text has spoken. Now silence completes it. We are moving from the mind into the body, from the study into the garden itself. And as the voice grows slower, you do not need to hold the edges of anything anymore. The leaves can hold them. The water can hold them. The evening birds can hold them. The warm stone can hold them. Only rest now. Only the garden. Only the quiet. You are walking now inside a garden, enclosed in peace. The walls are not there to trap you. They are there to keep the quiet whole. Stone holds the evening's warmth in long, patient breaths. Vines rest against ancient surfaces without hurry. Small leaves stir and then become still again. The path beneath you is soft with dust, and every step seems to land in a place already ready to receive it. Above you, the last light has thinned into a tender gold, and then into amber, and then into that deepened color that belongs only to the few moments before true night. Nothing rushes here. Even the shadows arrive gently, as though they too know this is holy ground. Evening birds trade their final calls across branches, not sharply, not urgently, but like small notes passed between watchful friends. One sound answers another. Then quiet settles again. The garden is wide enough for wandering and sheltered enough for rest. Trees stand in their places with calm assurance. Their branches make shapes against the dimming sky, and their leaves gather the last remaining glow before releasing it into shadow. Fruit hangs where it belongs. Stone borders trace the edges of planted things. Somewhere nearby, water moves with a soft continuance, never demanding attention, only offering it. As you walk, the air cools little by little around your face and hands. The day's warmth still lingers in the walls, in the steps, in the flat stones where sunlight rested longest. If you place your palm against one of them, it holds the memory of light without burning. That is how this garden receives you tonight, with a warmth that does not ask anything from you in return. There is a turning in the path where the stone opens into a small courtyard of earth and low herbs. Their fragrance has deepened in the evening. Not strong, not sweet in a heavy way, just enough to tell you that life continues quietly even after the light is lowered. A single branch leans overhead. The leaves shift once in the breeze and then are still. You stand there for a moment, and the stillness does not feel empty. It feels inhabited. You begin to walk again. Your steps are slower now, not because you are trying to be slow, but because the garden has its own pace and you have already begun to accept it. That is one of the kindnesses of quiet places. They do not argue with the body. They teach it by gentleness. Here, no step needs to prove anything. No breath needs to be corrected. No thought needs to be chased down to its ending. The path is enough. The stones are enough. The dim leaves are enough. On one side, a low wall runs beside beds of green. On the other side, taller trunks rise where the evening birds have nearly finished singing. The last few notes drift down through the branches and then disappear. In their place, comes a deeper hush, one that seems to spread outward from the roots of things. It reaches the path, it reaches the stones, it reaches your shoulders and the place behind your eyes where so much effort has lived, and it asks for nothing but permission to stay. The garden remains around you as the light fades further. The trunks darken. The leaves become shapes rather than details. The warm stone underfoot still gives back some little bit of what it gathered all day. That warmth rises through your feet, through your legs, through the center of you, not as heat, as reassurance, as if the very ground were saying there is no need to brace yourself here. You pass a place where the wall opens just enough for a longer view into the inner garden. Rows of growing things rest under dusk. A few pale blossoms are still visible in the dimness. Their petals seem to gather what light remains and keep it softly. The air has that evening stillness that does not feel silent, because it is full of small continuities, leaf against leaf. A wing settling, water moving farther off, the almost sound of living things at peace. If you wish, you may sit now on a broad stone bench built into the wall. It is still faintly warm. The surface is smooth with age. You do not sink, you do not strain. You are simply held. In front of you, the garden spreads in layered shadow. Above you, a first star has appeared in the deepening blue. Another waits farther off. Neither one is bright enough to startle the darkness. They belong to it gently. The birds are nearly quiet now. One last soft call, then stillness again. The kind that does not feel like absence. The kind that feels like watchfulness. The kind that feels like being allowed to stop. You remain there as long as you like. There is no measurement here now. No counting. No next requirement. The day has gone where days go, and the garden has received the evening without resistance. You can do the same. Let the shoulders lower a little. Let the face soften in its own time. Let the hands rest wherever they naturally fall. The stone beneath you asks nothing. It only keeps its quiet warmth. A faint breeze moves across the courtyard. It touches the leaves. It touches your cheek. It passes on. Nothing follows it. No worry comes running after. No memory has to be unpacked. The breeze is only what it is, and then it is gone, and the hush returns exactly as gentle as before. Now the walls feel almost protective in the tenderest sense. They hold the night in good order. They keep the garden gathered. They keep the sounds from scattering too far. Inside them, everything seems to know how to become simpler. The path no longer calls you to walk it. The bench no longer asks you to sit upright. Even the branches above you seem to understand that the night has arrived for rest, not for striving. So remain, warm stone beneath you, evening air around you, trees at their posts, birds settled, herbs breathing their quiet fragrance into the dark. And beyond all of it, the slow faithfulness of water moving where it has always moved. The garden is keeping watch now. You do not need to. The sound of water becomes clearer after full night has settled. Not loud, not rushing, just a steady movement in the dark, as if the garden itself had a pulse and you could hear it now. You rise from the stone bench without effort and follow the path that bends toward the sound. The walls guide you. The trees lean over in places, then open again. Night has deepened, but the way does not feel hidden. It feels known. The water appears first as a pale moving line, then as a darker ribbon with silver resting on it where the sky finds it. It passes beside worn stones and roots that have learned its voice over many years. This is not a wild torrent. It is a faithful current, a stream that knows how to go on being itself in the dark. You come near enough to hear the smaller notes inside it. Water touching rock, water slipping past a small curve in the bank. water narrowing and then widening again. No two sounds fully alike, and yet all of them belonging to one long softness. If you kneel near it, the coolness rises at once. If you remain standing, the air above it brushes your skin with its calmer temperature. The garden and the water have entered the night together, and neither one is resisting it. A branch bends low over the stream. Its leaves nearly touch the current, and now and then one of them grazes the surface with a small sound and then lifts again. Somewhere farther along, water moves over a shallower shelf of stone and makes a more open murmur. Farther still, it deepens and quiets. The stream is not one single sound. It is a long conversation of softness. The path beside it is narrow enough to keep you close. Gravel gives way to earth. Earth gives way to flat stones set at intervals where the bank is lower. Each step remains easy. The night feels generous here. Not empty, not uncertain, just wide, cool, and patient. The kind of night in which nothing has to be forced to continue. The water continues on its own. If you sit near the bank, the stream takes over the work of steadying time. Moments stop feeling separate from one another. The dark does not arrive in pieces. It is already gathered fully. All you have to do is let it remain around you. Above the water, stars have become clearer. Not many at first, then more as your eyes adjust. They rest overhead without urgency. Their light reaches the stream in broken lines that gather and separate as the current moves. There is no need to name the water now, no need to explain its course. It is enough that it moves, enough that it stays faithful to its path, enough that you can hear in it a rhythm older than your own thoughts. The stream does not rush to finish anything. It does not hold itself back either. It simply goes on, and in going on, it teaches rest. Let the sound meet you where words can no longer help. Let it pass by the crowded rooms of the mind without entering them. Let it move along the edges of thought until thought itself grows less interested in holding shape. There are nights when what the soul needs is not a new answer, but a steadier sound than the one it has been making for itself all day. The water can be that sound tonight. You listen a little longer. The current leans around stone. It gathers itself. It opens again. A tiny shift in the breeze draws ripples across the surface, and the reflected stars loosen into trembling points and then settle. Nothing in the stream resists change. Nothing in it clings. Each small motion becomes part of the larger piece. The bank beside you is cool, but the stone you rest against still keeps a little of the day. Behind you, the walled garden remains held in darkness and order. Before you, the current continues. Beyond you, trees stand in long rows of shadow, their roots going deeper than sight. You are between steadiness and steadiness, stone and water, wall and sky, root and star. Maybe you lower your hand near the stream, not to disturb it, only to feel the air above it. Coolness rises there as naturally as silence rises in a holy place. Your fingers need hold nothing. The stream is enough. The dark is enough. The little silver line of moving water is enough. Night does not become heavy when it is met like this. It becomes deep, and depth is kinder than heaviness. So remain by the water a while longer. Let its continuous sound untie the need to track every thought. Let it carry the edges of the day farther downstream than you can follow. Let it keep moving after you stop trying. The current knows its work. The night knows its order. The stars know their places. The stones know how to remain still. You are allowed to rest among things that do not need your management. Now the sound grows gentler still, not because the stream has changed, but because you have come nearer to its pace. That happens in quiet places. At first, they seem separate from us. Then, little by little, they begin to lend us their rhythm. The water has lent you its rhythm now, slow enough to trust, steady enough to follow, soft enough to rest beside without fear of waking the old noise again. Above the bank, a branch shifts once and settles. Far off, perhaps a night bird gives one soft call and then is still. The stream does not answer in language. It answers by continuing, and for this hour of darkness, continuing is enough. The water is keeping watch now. You do not need to. The path from the stream leads back inward, deeper into the quiet heart of the garden. Night is complete now. The walls hold their dark shape. The trees are gentler than silhouettes, more like presences than objects. The air has cooled, but not into coldness. It is a living coolness, a breathable stillness, the kind that lets the body unclench without realizing it all at once. You return to the inner court where the stone still waits. It has released most of the day's warmth now, but not all of it. Enough remains to welcome you back. Enough remains to remind you that even what has been cooling all night can still hold a little tenderness. You settle there again, or perhaps lie back if the stone is broad and smooth enough. Above you, the sky opens wider than it seemed at dusk. More stars now, deeper dark between them. Nothing sharp, nothing demanding. Only quiet brightness suspended in patient distance. The garden has changed since evening, but only by becoming more itself. The birds are asleep. The herbs are darker now, their fragrance lower and steadier. The path is no longer something to follow. It is simply present. The water can still be heard, though farther off, softened by walls, leaves, and distance into a low, continuous hush. It does not call you away. It simply remains part of the night. This is the hour in which even memory grows quiet. Not erased, not denied, just less insistent. The mind no longer needs to keep its lantern raised over every unfinished thing. The garden is dim enough now for gentleness to do what effort could not do. The walls keep watch. The trees keep watch. The water keeps watch. The stars keep watch. You do not need to keep watch anymore. A leaf releases from a branch somewhere high above and comes down softly, too softly to hear, until it touches earth. Then, stillness again. The kind of stillness that can hold a person without pressing against them. The kind that does not ask for explanation. The kind that lets breathing become simple because nothing nearby is in conflict. If there is any remaining tension in you, let it settle where it naturally settles. Not because you are commanding it away, but because the night around you is no longer feeding it. There is warm stone under you, dark branches over you, a walled garden holding its form, water moving in the distance. No need to carry farther what has already arrived where it can rest. This is the hush before grief, and because it is before grief, it is also before fear, before blame, before hiding, before the hard inward turn. But now those words are only far edges fading into the dark. The garden itself is nearer than any explanation. The peace itself is nearer than any analysis. You are not studying Eden now. You are lying down beside its quiet. In this hour, the world seems gathered rather than scattered. The walls gather the garden gathers the night gathers the stars. The stream gathers and carries the darkness in its moving line. And somewhere within that layered gentleness, your own thoughts begin to gather less tightly around themselves. They do not have to disappear. They only have to loosen. The stone beneath you is steady. The sky above you is untroubled. The trees do not lean in with warning. They simply stand. Even the darkness has become a soft thing here, more like a blanket drawn over bright surfaces than an emptiness waiting to swallow them. That is the kindness of holy night. It covers without erasing. It quiets without taking away what is good. You may remain awake a little longer if you wish. There is no pressure to cross any threshold. Rest comes best when it is not chased. So just remain where you are, listening to the farther water, feeling the night's cooler air on the face and hands, resting against stone that has known both sunlight and darkness and has not been troubled by either. And the story we entered tonight still lingers softly, not to trouble you, not to ask anything more from you, only to keep watch beside you for a while. Adam and Eve, in their 7 peaceful years. The garden holier than all the earth besides. The warm paths, the evening birds, the faithful water, the hush before grief. It all remains like a lamp turned low, enough to comfort, not enough to wake. If sleep comes now, let it come quietly. If it takes a little longer, let that be quiet too. Nothing has been lost by slowness here. The walls are patient. The trees are patient. The water is patient. The stars are patient. The night does not measure you by speed. And if one last thought passes through, let it pass as a night breeze passes through leaves, felt and then gone. No need to hold it. No need to answer it. The garden is large enough to let it move on without disturbance. The dark is gentle enough to keep it from returning with sharp edges. So lie here now, beneath the branches and above the warm memory of stone. Let the farther water continue where you no longer need to follow. Let the stars remain where you no longer need to count them. Let the walls hold their silence. Let the herbs breathe their hidden fragrance into the dark. Let the whole garden keep its form while you slowly release yours into rest. And the story we entered tonight still lingers softly, not as a warning, not as a burden, but as a peace remembered carefully enough to be shared, a peace before sorrow, a peace before the world grew loud, a peace counted in years and carried now into the quiet of this room. Sleep now, quiet listener. The garden is keeping watch. The water is keeping watch. The night is keeping watch, and the story we entered tonight still lingers softly, not to trouble you, but to keep watch with you. As you rest, the garden remains after words have thinned. It remains when analysis has stepped back. It remains when the mind no longer wants to arrange what it has heard. And that is where you are now, quiet listener, not in the effort of understanding, but in the after peace of having been gently led somewhere holy and then allowed to stay. The walls still hold the night around you. The stone still remembers a little warmth. The trees are darker now, but not darker in any threatening way. They are simply farther inside themselves, as all good things become in the late hour. The leaves no longer shine with evening light. They hold a softer darkness. The branches no longer frame the sky. They rest beneath it. And the stars, patient above all of it, seem less like points and more like watchful distances that ask nothing at all from you. You breathe in, and the air is cooler than it was before. You breathe out, and nothing needs to be done with that breath once it leaves you. It disappears into the same night that receives the trees, the wall, the path, the stream, the herbs, the silence. Everything here knows how to receive without asking anything back. A faint stirring moves through one upper branch and then is gone. No alarm follows it. No second noise rushes in behind it. The stillness returns so naturally that you realize it never really left. It only widened for a moment and then gathered itself again. That is how this whole night has been. Not empty, gathered. You remain where you are, feeling the steadiness under you. The stone does not shift. The wall does not strain. The earth does not resist the night. Nothing beneath you is uncertain. And sometimes that is enough to begin softening all the places inside you that have been trying too hard to remain on duty. Let the shoulders learn from the wall. Let the jaw learn from the still branch. Let the breath learn from the water you can hear farther off. Not by effort, only by nearness. Some things do not have to be taught directly. They are learned by resting close to what is already at peace. The garden is at peace. The wall is at peace. The water is at peace. The stars are at peace. And little by little, without pressure, the body begins to remember what it is like not to argue with the night. You can almost feel the layout of the garden now without seeing it clearly. The familiar turn of the path. The place where the wall opens a little. The inner court where herbs breathe their hidden fragrance into the darkness. The broader stones near the stream. The roots under the trees. The spaces where birds had been earlier, now quiet in sleep. This is what happens when a place has been sat with long enough. It stops feeling like scenery and begins to feel like shelter. There is no reason to hurry through shelter. No reason to prove anything inside it. No reason to keep rehearsing the day once you have entered a night like this. The garden asks for nothing but your willingness to remain. And even that willingness can be small. Even that willingness can be half asleep. Even that willingness can come and go while the garden stays kind. The farther water goes on moving. You cannot see every part of it now, but you do not need to. Its sound is enough. A low continuity, a soft, unbroken line of motion in the dark. Not speech, not instruction, just fidelity. Water doing what water does. Passing stone, passing root, passing under stars, passing through the holy enclosure without disturbing it. If one thought still clings close, let it sit beside the water rather than inside your chest. Let it hear something steadier than itself. Let it lose interest in being the loudest thing in the room. There is so much here that does not need to insist on itself. The stone, the wall, the branch, the herb, the star, the water. Perhaps the thought can become less insistent too. You do not need to solve your way into sleep. You do not need to feel perfectly calm in order to be carried toward rest. You only need a place that does not increase the noise. This garden does not increase it. It lowers it. It gathers it. It lets the sharp edges soften against stone, shadow, distance, and the sound of water continuing without demand. The night has deepened enough now that even the sky feels slower. The stars do not appear to move, and yet the hour itself is moving through them, gentle and irreversible. You are not required to mark that movement. The garden marks it for you in quieter ways, cooling air, settling branches, the way the last stored warmth in the stone thins without vanishing all at once. Somewhere beyond the wall, the larger world still exists. Roads, rooms, clocks, responsibilities, conversations left unfinished, tasks waiting for morning, but none of them are inside the enclosure right now. Right now there is wall, stone, leaf, root, star, and water. Right now there is a body being invited not to disappear, but to rest. Right now there is enough quiet to let the soul unclench one finger at a time. Rest does not always arrive like a wave. Sometimes it comes like the dark reaching one more branch, like the air cooling by one more degree, like the water becoming more familiar than your own thoughts, like the stone under you convincing the body that it is safe to stop holding itself up from the inside. So let rest come in the form it chooses tonight, slowly, without announcement, without performance, without any need to know exactly when the crossing happened. The garden is not measuring you by precision. It is only keeping its quiet. You may notice how little is being asked of the eyes now. Shapes, not details. Presence, not inspection. This is a mercy. The world has demanded much looking from you. Perhaps too much, but not here. Here the dark lets things be enough without their edges needing to explain themselves. A tree can be a tree in shadow. A wall can be a wall in silence. A stream can be a stream in the dark. You can be a soul at rest without having to account for every fragment of the day. The herbs release a softer fragrance now, lower and steadier than before. Not enough to pull at attention, only enough to make the air feel lived in. The garden is full of such things tonight. Presences that do not tug, warmth that does not demand, sound that does not interrupt, distance that does not isolate. Even the dark here feels relational, as though it has gathered around living things in order to keep them from scattering. If the heart has been living scattered, let the dark gather it. If the thoughts have been running in separate directions, let the wall gather them. If the body has been braced against too much, let the stone gather it back into weight, into stillness, into simple, creaturely rest. There is no need to invent a perfect peace. This one is enough. A garden at night, a stream in the dark, a wall holding its shape, a sky keeping its stars, a body no longer asked to prove it can go on. That is enough. That is holy enough. That is quiet enough. The longer you remain, the more the place itself seems to breathe in slow agreement. The branches rise and fall only when the faintest breeze touches them. The water deepens and softens, deepens and softens. The air along the path moves, pauses, moves again. Nothing in the garden competes. Nothing jostles for importance. All of it belongs to one long yes of stillness. Perhaps that is why the night feels trustworthy here. Not because nothing exists beyond it, but because everything within it knows its place. The wall does not try to be the water. The water does not try to be the stars. The stars do not try to be the stone. Each thing remains itself, and, in remaining itself, contributes to the whole piece. There is wisdom in that, and there is rest in being near it. You may feel the body sinking a little more naturally now into whatever supports it, not collapsing, not giving way in fear, only releasing the unnecessary hold. There is a difference. The garden knows the difference. A branch resting is not a branch broken. Water slowing around stone is not water defeated. A body softening towards sleep is not a body failing. It is simply obeying the kindness of the hour. The kindness of the hour is all around you. In the wall that encloses without imprisoning. In the path that remains even when you stop walking. In the bench that still offers itself, though no one asks it to. In the stream that keeps moving without requiring you to follow. In the star above the highest branch, quiet and remote, and perfectly unconcerned with hurry. You can let the hour do its work. You can let the night carry more than you are carrying now. You can let the garden continue being itself while you become less effortful inside it. Nothing fragile is being endangered by your rest. Nothing holy is being dishonored by your sleep. If anything, sleep here feels like trust. A small trust. A wordless trust. But real. The farther world of grief and noise is not denied. It is simply not invited to speak here. Not now. Not in this enclosure. Tonight belongs to the peace before sorrow had a voice. And even though you do not live in Eden, you can still be held by the memory of that peace. You can still lie within its echo. You can still let the ancient hush offer you its slower pace. There is something healing in being near a peace that does not depend on your perfection. The stone does not ask whether you are wise today. The water does not ask whether you handled everything well. The wall does not ask whether your heart was disciplined enough. The stars do not ask whether you deserve rest. They simply remain. And in their remaining, they give you permission to stop negotiating with yourself. If your breathing has become softer, let it stay soft. If it is still uneven, let it be uneven without criticism. The stream does not move the same way at every point along its bank, and yet it is still one stream. The night does not feel identical in every corner of the garden, and yet it is still one night. You do not have to be uniform to be held. You do not have to be perfectly still to enter rest. Perhaps there is a place inside you still listening for danger. If so, let it listen a little longer, not to alarms, but to the repeated evidence that nothing here is attacking it. Water, silence, stone, branch, star, wall, water again. Silence again, stone still, branch still, star still, wall still. The nervous part of the soul learns slowly. That is all right. The garden is not impatient. And if that listening part begins to relax, even a little, then the night becomes deeper than mere darkness. It becomes protection. It becomes permission. It becomes a kind of veil between you and everything that insisted too loudly upon itself during the day. The day is not erased. It is simply farther away. Far enough away now that the sound of the stream matters more. Far enough away now that the coolness of the air on the face matters more. Far enough away now that the weight of the body against the stone matters more. The garden keeps simplifying the world, not by removing what is real, but by returning it to proportion. A leaf is only a leaf. A wall is only a wall. A star is only a star. A breath is only a breath. And in a tired heart, that kind of only can feel like mercy. Because everything has been too much. Because too many things have arrived enlarged. Because the mind has forgotten how small and steady a single thing can be when it is not loaded with fear. Here is a single thing, the stone beneath you, steady, neither asking nor accusing, only supporting. Here is another, the farther water, moving without demand. Here is another, the branch above, resting because the night has asked it to rest. Here is another, your own next breath, already arriving without your having to summon it. One simple thing after another. This is how the garden teaches the body to come back from the edge. The stars are clearer now, or perhaps your eyes have become more willing to receive them. Their brightness is mild, never harsh. They do not pierce the dark so much as live quietly within it. That too is a kind of instruction. Light does not always have to conquer to be enough. Sometimes it only has to remain. So let there be enough tonight. Enough stone. Enough water. Enough star. Enough dark. Enough rest. Enough quiet for the thoughts to stop trying to solve themselves. Enough safety for the body to loosen where it has been holding too tightly. Enough gentleness for sleep, to feel less like surrender, and more like being guided somewhere older and kinder than effort. The garden has known night before this one. The wall has held darkness before this one. The stream has moved through hours more silent than this. The stars have looked down on countless resting places. You do not have to teach any of them how to do their work. They are already doing it. And because they are already doing it, you may stop doing so much yourself. Now, even the idea of getting somewhere can begin to fade. There is nowhere to arrive from here. The garden is already here. The night is already here. The quiet is already here. Sleep, if it comes, will not be something you achieve. It will be something that finds you lying low enough, soft enough, quiet enough to be received. Maybe the hand loosens. Maybe the brow eases. Maybe the space behind the eyes grows less bright with thought. Maybe not all at once. Maybe one small degree at a time. That is how many good things happen in the dark. Not suddenly, faithfully. A little more stone, a little more water, a little more night, a little less effort, a little less noise, a little less need to remain entirely assembled. If you are still awake, that is all right. The garden is not disappointed in wakefulness. It knows how to hold both wakefulness and sleep. If you are drifting, that is all right too. The wall will keep its shape. The stream will keep its sound. The branches will keep their places. Nothing here depends on your full attention. You are allowed to fade a little. You are allowed to become less central to the room. You are allowed to be carried by a peace that does not require you to manage it. And the story we entered tonight still lingers softly. Adam and Eve walking their 7 peaceful years. The garden holier than all the earth besides. Work before weariness. Paths before hiding. The warm evening before grief found a voice. It all lingers softly now, not as a lesson pressing against you, but as a chamber of remembered peace, something old enough to feel sacred, something gentle enough to accompany sleep. So remain a little longer beneath the stars. Remain beside the wall. Remain within hearing of the water. Remain where the stone still keeps its tenderness. Nothing more is required. Nothing else must be opened. Nothing needs to be carried farther into the night. The garden is keeping watch. The water is keeping watch. The stars are keeping watch. The wall is keeping watch. The night itself is keeping watch. You do not need to. And if one last thought drifts through, let it drift like a leaf touching the stream. It lands. It moves. It is carried. That is all. No need to retrieve it. No need to follow it downstream. No need to know where it goes when it leaves the place where you first noticed it. The water knows how to carry what you no longer need to hold. The coolness deepens just a little more. The stars remain. The branches remain. The wall remains. The stream remains. The body remains, but more quietly now. More simply. More like part of the night's order than a problem set apart from it. This, too, is mercy. To be returned, even for a little while, to creaturely simplicity. Stone beneath. Sky above. Water near. Dark around. Breath within. Nothing forced. Nothing defended. Nothing demanded. And now the words themselves can begin to thin. The garden does not need many more of them. The night does not need many more of them. Sleep never asked for many. Only enough to bring you here. Only enough to leave you in good company. Only enough to let the stream become clearer than the sentence. The star clearer than the thought. The wall steadier than the effort. The dark kinder than the day. So I will leave you here, quietly, with the stone, with the wall, with the trees, with the stream, with the stars, with the memory of a peace counted carefully enough to still comfort tired hearts. Sleep now, quiet listener. The garden is keeping watch. The water is keeping watch. The stars are keeping watch. The night is keeping watch. And the story we entered tonight still lingers softly. Not to trouble you, not to press on you, only to keep watch with you as you rest. Stay here a little longer in the garden's last quiet, not because anything remains unfinished, only because the night is kind enough to keep holding you. The farther water still moves with that same faithful softness. The walls still keep the dark in gentle order. The branches are still resting above you. The stars are still present beyond the leaves. And the stone beneath you is still steady, still patient, still willing to carry your weight without question. If sleep has not fully arrived yet, let this be enough. A little more stillness, a little more cool air, a little more distance from the day's demands, a little more permission to be quiet without needing to explain why. Nothing here is impatient, not the wall, not the stream, not the branches, not the stars, and not this hour. So let the breath come and go as softly as it wants. Let the hands rest where they have fallen. Let the thoughts thin into shapes, and then into shadows, and then into almost nothing at all. The garden will not lose you if you drift. It will not leave you if you fade deeper into rest. It will simply remain what it has been all along, a place of warm stone, dark leaves, faithful water, and quiet watchfulness. And if there is one last feeling still awake in you, let it lie down here too, beside the path, beside the wall, beside the stream, not carried alone anymore, only set gently into the night where everything has already become slower and kinder. Sleep now, quiet listener. The garden is still keeping watch. The water is still keeping watch. The stars are still keeping watch. And the peace before sorrow still lingers softly around you. Stillness remains, the garden remains, and you may rest completely now,